Chuck Greaves, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
It's great to have you back. Last time we met in person at the Cortez Public Library and chatted about your last novel and had a great time doing that in person. And here we are on Zoom. And I don't know, the distance between us, I don't know, 40 miles, maybe tops, not sure. But I guarantee you this is the first ever podcast recording between Mancos and McElmo Canyon, Southwest Colorado.
Okay, I'm glad to be part of it.
Record-breaking, record-shattering podcast. So we're here because, drum roll, the release of your brand new Jack MacTaggart novel is due out Tuesday, May 17th at Chimera Club.
Exactly. I'm going to hold up a cover here for those who are curious. There it is.
Very, very sharp cover. Very sharp.
Thank you.
Jack MacTaggart mystery number
4.
Number 4. And so set us up. Let's just dive right into the Chimera Club. Where is this set? Who the heck is Jack MacTaggart? And how long has he been around?
Well, okay. So when I first decided to take a crack at writing novels, I was a lawyer in Los Angeles. This was in 2006. I quit my practice at age 50, had a small midlife crisis, I suppose you could say. And I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I started writing a novel. And the first novel I started writing was a mystery with a protagonist named Jack MacTaggart. Jack MacTaggart was basically a smarter, better looking, funnier version of me. Okay. He was a relatively young lawyer at the time, practicing in Los Angeles. And that first novel was called Hush Money. Long story short, I entered the manuscript in a international writing contest in which there were 680 entries, and I won. And as a result of that, I had an agent, a New York agent, and I signed a multi-book deal with St. Martin's Minotaur to publish the Jack MacTaggart mystery series.
Wow. Okay. Let's stop right there, because I think before we get into a little bit more, you entered it. There's over almost 700 entries. You shrugged and thought, well, may as well roll the dice and see what happens. When did you find out? How did you find out? What was the setting for all that?
All right, so I'll give you the full Monty here. So I actually had 2 manuscripts I entered in the contest. The mystery I entered in the best mystery category, and I had an historical novel based on a true crime called Hard Twisted, again a manuscript, and I entered that in the historical novel category. They were blind judged. And they picked the winners in 14 different categories. And then those 14 category winners faced off in another round of blind judging with a different set of judges to pick the overall winner, which is called the Storyteller Award. This was 2010. And it turned out that Hush Money came in first, the mystery, and Hard Twisted, the historical novel, came in second. That's the whole story.
Incredible. And yeah. Is this something you open up an envelope one day? Is this something where you're at a gathering? What's the deal there?
Yes, they had an awards dinner, which I went to with some friends who were actually visiting from LA, which was kind of fun. And I had no idea what to expect, but they had an MC with a tuxedo, and they would announce the third place winner, the second place winner, and the first place winner in each category. The fact that I was invited told me I was at least a third place winner in each of the categories, so I knew that much. And then they announced the 14 category winners. And it's funny, when I went up for the second time to collect the second award, whichever it was, I said to the MC, I said, we have to stop meeting like this. And he said, you're not finished yet. So I had a sense at that point that I was going to win the thing, which I did.
Wow. So then how long between that night and the contract offer from St. Martin's?
Yeah, it happened very quickly. There's actually another wrinkle to the story. At the same time, I also entered Hush Money in the Tony Hillerman Prize, which is a contest for best first mystery set in the American West. California being in the American West, I submitted it to that contest as well. I didn't win that contest, but the editor from St. Martin's Press, Peter Joseph, who ran that contest, called me and said, you didn't win, but we want to publish your novel anyway. And so I actually had, in a sense, I had an offer to publish Hush Money before I even had the agent. So I came to the agent saying, I won this award and I've got basically an offer. And she converted that offer into a multi-book deal, and she also was able to sell the historical novel to Bloomsbury, and that was Hard Twisted. So they both came out in 2012. So Mark, I was an overnight success after 5 years of knocking my head against the wall.
So publishing is just an easy business to deal with. All you do is write, and you're bound to get published and be picked up by one of the big boys.
Exactly. That's how it works, right?
Yeah. How did you realize, I'm sure you paid attention to others in the business and, what a struggle it can be to get your words out. Were you aware of that, or you just say, hey, well, these must be good, and you believed in your books, and away we go?
Well, yes to the latter, but as to the former, it wasn't like this was the first approach. I mean, I had been writing to agents for 4 years. I'd gotten 30 or 40 rejections from agents before winning the contest.
Gotcha.
It was winning the contest that opened the door for me. So
that's a really good tip to put out there to anybody who might be querying agents over and over. Keep your eye on contests. You just never know. Good visibility. Yeah.
Absolutely. And after this all happened to me, I wrote an article for the Writer magazine. I don't know if they've still published the Writer magazine, but it used to be one of the big writing mags. And the article was how you should not ignore contests. When I talk to people and they say, how do I get published? I say, well, you need an agent. How do you get an agent? Well, you can write query letters and send them out. That's how most people do it. You can go to a conference and sit down and get a pitch meeting with an agent, which is a good way to do it. Or you can enter a contest. And, obviously there's only one winner, but,
right.
What the heck, right?
Yeah. So let's get back to Jack MacTaggart. So Hush Money goes in and it comes out, gets published how soon?
It was acquired in 2010. It was published in late 2010 and was published in 2012.
And how did it do? What happened?
It did well. I mean, it was nominated for quite a number of awards. It was nominated for the Lefty, for the Shamus, for the Arizona, New Mexico Book Award. But the best honor I got, I think, from that process was the audiobook version of Hush Money was one of 5 finalists for the Audie Award for Best Mystery of the Year. So I was up against Laura Lippman and Louise Penny, who won. I mean, that was an honor for me, for a first-time novelist.
Fantastic. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So you wrote Hush Money. Your agent then came up with a multiple book, was it 2 or 3 book deal?
It was a 2-book deal, and then they extended one more for 3. Yeah.
Okay. And so did you know when you wrote Hush Money that this was a possible series character?
Yes. That was my hope, certainly. I didn't kill him off at the end, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. And did you have a good idea immediately what to do with the plot and the story arc for number 2 and number 3, or?
Yeah. My concept for the series was that I would put Jack in different settings where he was a fish out of water. See, Jack is a real blue collar lunch bucket kind of guy who became a lawyer and ended up being hired at this white shoe fancy law firm in Pasadena. A little bit like my background, to be frank. And in each of the cases, he's put in a place where he doesn't belong. So in Hush Money, he's hired by a woman who owns a very expensive show horse, and the whole book takes place in the world of equestrian show jumping. The second book takes place in the world of both modern art and politics, because he's representing a Senate candidate who's accused of a crime. In the third book, it's set in Napa Valley wine country. So he's among these fancy wine people. And in each of the cases, he's kind of, he's part of the story, but he's also he's also looking at himself, in the story with a certain wry detachment, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the theme that runs through the Jack MacTaggart novels. They're funny. He's funny. I mean, he says funny things. That's part of the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read Chimera Club and absolutely loved it, and the flow and the effortlessness and his The dialogue is just razor sharp, and it just, you just got to be alert because you never know what your clever idea you're going to get. Yeah. So I don't think we got the titles out there. Hush Money #1.
Hush Money was #1. Green-Eyed Lady was #2. The Last Heir was #3, and the Chimera Club is #4.
Great. So let's tease a little bit more out on the Chimera Club. What's the general? You sort of quickly mentioned the general concept, but what the heck is a Chimera Club? What the heck is Chimera? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes, you are. A chimera is a creature from Greek mythology that has the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. Okay. And what I wanted to do with the Chimera Club was, see, these books are all whodunits. So if you enjoy a good mystery and you enjoy trying to solve the mystery along with Jack, that's what, that's the kind of reader who will like these books.
Right.
So I wanted to set up a situation that was impossible. Namely, there's a man who's killed. His name is Ari Goldstone. He's a film producer, sort of a Harvey Weinstein type character who's been accused of sexual impropriety by a number of starlets. And he's being sued by them. And then one day they find him murdered in a swank hotel in Los Angeles, tied to the bedposts and stabbed to death. Okay. The police determine from DNA evidence at the scene that there can only be of one killer. And the DNA belonged to the father of one of his accusers, okay, one of his victims. So it appears they've got the perfect suspect. Problem is that suspect is 7,000 miles away in Hong Kong on the night of the murder. So that's the setup. How can the only person who DNA says can only have committed the crime by 1,000,000 to 1 odds also not possibly have committed the crime? That's the setup.
And a riveting one it is, with a big layer of, humor driving it as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Without giving away too much about the end, was there one moment or an article you read or something that inspired this whole idea?
Yeah, it's tricky to talk about this because to talk about it is to give away the ending. Okay.
Yeah.
It's sort of a high concept ending. So this is a case where the idea came to me fully blown. Okay. And I said, that is the perfect ending to a book. Now I have to write the book to build to that ending. That's how the book came out, structurally. Yeah.
So you've been doing some other writing, and we'll get to that. I want to touch on some of the other novels that are out there, Church of the Graveyard Saints and things like that. But, were you on the lookout for another Jack MacTaggart idea? Did you think the series was kind of over? Or did you say, okay, I want to, here's a chunk of time I want to bring Jack back?
Yeah. So the situation for me was I had these 3 books I wrote 1 year apart. Hush Money came out in 2012, Green-Eyed Lady 2013, The Last Heir in 2014. But I also aspired to write more general literary fiction. When I read for pleasure, I read some genre fiction, but I mostly read literary fiction, so-called literary fiction. So I wrote Hard Twisted initially, and then I wrote another historical / literary novel called Tom and Lucky. Tom and Lucky was the Wall Street Journal named it to their year-end 10 best list, which was nice. And it was a finalist for the Harper Lee Prize, which was nice. And then I wrote a book set here locally in the Cortez area called Church of the Graveyard Saints. So those 3 books, Hard Twisted, Tom and Lucky, and Church of the Graveyard Saints, were all written under a different name, under the name C. Joseph Greaves. And the reason for that is when we initially sold the 2 books in 2010, one to St. Martin's and one to Bloomsbury, they didn't want me to use the same name in both books because they were so radically different books.
Right.
And so the compromise was I agreed to use Chuck Greaves for the mystery novels and C. Joseph Greaves, which is, another version of my name, for the non-mystery novels. So I stopped writing the MacTaggart novels. I wrote 2 more C. Joseph Greaves novels. And then to your question, what do I do next? I always loved Jack. Okay. Jack was my first my first love. Crime fiction was my first love, and I wanted to go back to it. So after an 8-year hiatus, I wrote another Jack novel. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Was it fairly easy to get back on that horse?
Yeah. The funny thing about the Jack novels, I always say they're written in my natural voice. If you have a natural voice as a writer, and I think we all do, Jack is my natural voice. It's first person. There's some humor in it. It's breezy. It's clever. It strives to be clever, at least. That's my natural writing style. The other books, they're in the third person for one thing, which is not natural to me. And I really, they're the kinds of books where you work on making each sentence perfect. You know what I mean? And you try to be literary in doing that. So those books are a lot harder for me to write. The Jack books are easy. So for me, it was like riding the bicycle to get back to writing Jack.
Well, you say that, but natural style, the folks at the Wall Street Journal who put you on the best 10 books of the year list might disagree. And the many folks who read Hard Twisted, including me, and were frankly blown away by the style and the flavor of that book and capturing the era of the 1930s in the Southwest Colorado and Texas, Oklahoma, all that, would say that also you must have two sides to yourself, because those flowed beautifully.
Well, thank you. But those are a lot of work, and writing a book set in the 30s is a lot more work than you realize, because not only are you trying to write a literary novel, you're trying to write an entertaining novel, etc. You're also trying to be true to the time and place, which involves dialect. It involves a lot of research on things you would never even think about researching, like, did tents have zippers in 1935? Did jars have screw caps in 19? Every time you're writing something, you say, wait a minute, I better go research that.
Yeah.
Thank God we have Google, right?
Yep. Wow. So with Chimera Club, I don't even know the answer to this. Does the law change very much? Is this something you had to make sure you're up to date on? Did the LA scenes, buildings, streets, sort of the process of going into the courts and all that? I assume most of that is somewhat static, but you have to make sure you're not missing out on a detail that maybe have changed in the last 5 or 6 years since the last MacTaggart book came out.
Yeah, good point. I haven't practiced law now for 15 years, and I was never a criminal lawyer. Okay. And this is a criminal case. Fortunately, I have a friend, a buddy who's a former federal prosecutor who's currently a defense lawyer. If I ever have any legal issues, I can give him a call and say, how does this work? For example, one of the things in the book has to do with what happens when a criminal defendant is deemed to be incompetent, and they have a separate competency trial, a mini trial in civil court to determine his competency to stand trial in criminal court. So that's one thing I had to learn about. Okay. In terms of setting, this book takes place mostly in old original downtown and Chinatown in Los Angeles. And there is a climactic scene that takes place at Union Station, which is the train and bus depot in the old, beautiful, ornate depot in downtown LA. So I went there, and I spent the day, walking around and, just taking it in and thinking how can I use this space? And as you know, having read the book, there's a lengthy scene, 2 scenes actually that take place there in the Union Station depot. So, that's part of it.
Yep. Very cool. So when you finished Chimera Club, you have been published by St. Martin's. You've had other books with major publishers. You've had incredible blurbs all across the place for various novels. You've had an agent for many years. Wall Street Journal, 10 best books of the year. Many award nominations, Shamus, Macavity, on and on, Lefty. You go back to your agent with Chimera Club. I mean, I would, in your shoes, I'd fully expect, well, sell this book and let's go. Let's get another contract.
Yeah, except for one problem. At that point, I didn't have an agent because my agent left the business. at the end, shortly after we'd sold Tom and Lucky to Bloomsbury, she decided she wanted to pursue a career, doing something else. And the agency handled mostly nonfiction. So I was a free agent. I sold Church of the Graveyard Saints by myself to a small publisher, Torrey House Press, wonderful small publisher.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that was fortunate.
Somebody, Scott Graham is with Torrey House, and they do tons of great nonfiction too. Yep.
Sure. Craig Childs is with them. Pam, a lot of, very good environmental writers.
Right.
So I either had to go out and start the process of finding another agent, which I tried a little bit, but the thing I learned is that, and agents knew this, it's hard to pick up a series after it's been, sitting for 8 years. So there wasn't a lot of interest in reviving Jack, among agents at least. And I had one offer from a small publisher to publish the book, which I turned down, and decided to try to test the waters in indie publishing to self-publish the book. So this is my after six traditionally published books. This is my first self-published novel.
What went into your analysis before we get to the steps of self-publishing? Just what went into your analysis? How did you decide to turn down the small publisher?
I just penned out the numbers, and I thought I could do better, that I had a fan base already in place, and that I could control every aspect of the book, from the way the cover looks. I designed the cover. The cover illustration was done by an artist friend of mine, for example. It's been a really fun process. One of the frustrations of dealing with a publisher, as you know, is you really don't control things. I mean, you have a right to consult on the cover, but I haven't liked any of my covers, to be honest with you. They always say, "Oh, everybody here is so excited about your cover. Isn't it great?" And you say, "No, I don't like it." They say, "Well, that's going to be your cover." That's what they basically, So it was nice to have control over that. And I didn't butt heads with editors. I always got along with my editors in the past. Anton Mueller at Bloomsbury, or Peter Joseph at St. Martin's. But again, this book is all me. There's no other inputs in this book besides me, and that's nice. If it sinks or swims, it'll be on my dime entirely. I can't say, "Oh, if only I hadn't, changed it the way they wanted me to," or whatever. It's on me. So, it's interesting.
Yep. What about just in general, how hard would you say it was to pull all the pieces together to self-publish and get it ready for the big limelight? Yeah,
I cheated a little bit. I hired somebody to help me with the formatting and all that. So I didn't have to get into the weeds in terms of all the nuances of how to format a book for Kindle and how to do it for Ingram Spark and whatnot. One thing I did do myself basically was I did the audiobook. I didn't record it, but I used ACX, which is a great company. Is that ACX? That's the name of it?
Yeah. It's through Amazon.
Yeah. So you basically, you say, "I've got a book," and a narrator says, "I'd like to read your book," and you make a deal. It's a really interesting, interesting concept for a company.
Right.
And the audiobook actor was great. A guy named Mike Piscatelli did a wonderful job. I just finished listening to the last of it a couple days ago. And it's going to come out almost at the same time. So the book will be on the ebook will be on Amazon Kindle, KDP. The paperback will be available through Ingram Spark, which distributes to anybody. So the book is available wherever books are sold. And the audiobook will be on Audible.
That's great. Absolutely terrific. Any little tips or general, want to pass along a suggestion if somebody's just looking at getting into this process, maybe they're 3 months behind where you are today. Any recommendations, little flags, anything that they should look for or do?
There are so many decision points along the way. Should you just do Kindle or should you go wide? Should you, publish paperbacks just with Kindle, or should you go with somebody else? And again, I had guidance from people who'd done this before. So for me, I sort of listened to people who'd been successful doing it before. I'm not the best probably person to give advice in this regard. Self-publishing is the first foray for me.
Yeah.
It may be a disaster. I don't know. There are plenty of self-published authors out there who know it cold, and they've got websites, they've got articles on, you can Google and read articles. And there's a lot of great articles online. BookBub is a great source for articles about publishing and self-publishing. So I'd say just do your research. And if you know anybody who's got more experience than I do in this process, by all means, pick their brains.
Yeah, that's great. I want to get back to just sort of more on the writing side of stuff. And you've touched on it a little bit, and you talked about how hard it was to write Hard Twisted or Tom and Lucky. You didn't really say whether you found Church of the Graveyard Saints to also be a challenge. That was a completely different voice. But I don't know too many writers who, able to slip into some completely different mode, particularly when I read Hard Twist. And I'll just be a little bit more personal here, because I was just really transported by a completely different voice and really in terms of that style of fiction, just on its own, Hard Twisted was its own dry, wry, but clear voice, literary voice, telling a story and moving things so well. I guess I'm just asking about your process and how you get your head full of or your ideas full of a completely different tone. Maybe this just comes down to hitting a good tone and knowing you've got it.
Well, like I say, the first person novels have come easily to me, okay, because I'm a natural first person. I think all of us are natural first person storytellers. That's how the first stories were told around the campfire, and there's an intimacy to first person narration that appeals to me. Writing in the third person, puts a little bit of a barrier between you and the reader. And for me, that took some work to overcome. I don't know. But in terms of putting your head in the right place, one thing I did, I shouldn't confess to this, but I will. When I wrote Hard Twisted, because it was such a dark story set in the Southwest, it's a story basically of a 13-year-old girl who's kidnapped by her father's murderer, a true story.
Yeah.
In Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, and she's taken on a 1-year crime and killing spree across the American Southwest that results in multiple additional murders. And it's all true. But the setting is so evocative. Most of it takes place in Monument Valley, in the Valley of the Gods, in southeastern Utah, and back in Texas. And so it was just so noirish, and so just the time and place was just so evocative to me. It reminded me of Cormac McCarthy. Okay. So what I did every day when I sat down to write for that day, I had Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy sitting here, and I'd pick it up and I'd read 2 pages of Cormac McCarthy just to get in the mood, and I'd put it aside, and then I'd write. And that was my daily inspiration. And in the course of writing that book, which took me 2 years, I probably read the Border trilogy 3 times through.
Wow.
I'd already read it. I already loved it. But just to give myself his fresh voice in my head. And from there, I'd filter it. It's not exactly like Cormac. You can never be just like the writer you're trying to imitate. But it was enough. It put me in enough of a frame of mind to be able to execute that particular book.
Right. Well, I think that's an interesting tip and idea. And
Mark, sometimes it's counterintuitive. I know there are writers who say, if I'm writing a mystery novel, I won't read a mystery novel while I'm writing mine because I don't want to be influenced by it. And I actually had that attitude for the first book. I don't think I read any genre fiction during those 2 years because I didn't want to be influenced. Now I've abandoned both of those concepts now, but it's something to think about.
Yeah. Well, years ago, I way before I started really even trying to put together a full manuscript. I'm the kind of guy who says, how hard is it to play guitar? So I pick up a guitar and I put my fingers on the fretboard and say, oh yeah, it's hard. At least at first, until you get your muscle memory going, your finger memory going. But I also thought, I wonder what it's like to actually feel those sentences come together. And I don't know what novel I pulled out, but I just picked a book I liked and I just typed those same words. Of course, I wasn't going to do anything with it. I just wanted to see how it felt. It was kind of an interesting exercise. It was kind of, because no longer was I making choices. I was just sort of going through the motions, and somebody else had, and probably some genius writer like John Updike or somebody had, poured these words out and made a zillion choices to get that first opening paragraph. But somehow it made me feel better. I don't know.
Oh, that's really interesting. And of course, when you're writing your first novel, one of the things you have to figure out right away is, how does this work? Where do you put the paragraph breaks? Where do you put the comma after, before or after the quotation mark? What do you do with those dialogue tags? There's a lot of, little technical things that you have to focus on. When you're reading a book for pleasure, you don't focus on those things. They just kind of flow by you. But when you're sitting down to do it, you got to figure those things out. So yeah, you got to take a book or a couple of books and say, okay, how does this work?
Right. Wow. Yeah. So did you get more pleasure out of writing Hard Twisted and Tom and Lucky, or do you get more pleasure out of writing Jack MacTaggart?
I'd say it's more fun writing MacTaggart, but maybe it's more satisfying having written the other books. You know what I mean? Because I was proud that I was able to pull those books off. Whereas I had more fun just writing the MacTaggart novels.
Right. So let's just, in a kind of a minute or two, recap, and just to make sure folks know, we've sort of touched on Hard Twisted. Let's do a sort of a couple minutes on Tom and Lucky, just if anybody might be interested in that one.
Okay. There's an interesting backstory to Tom and Lucky. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and my wife and I had a friend we knew from horseback riding because we were both equestrians. And this woman, her name was Cece Levy, and her father was a famous New York lawyer back in the day called George Morton Levy. And her father had represented Lucky Luciano, the gangster, in his famous 1936 Vice trial. Now, Cece said, when my dad died in 1977, we packed up all of his file cabinets and moved them into storage in a barn in upstate New York. And nobody's seen them ever since. And I said, Cece, I'd love to go spend some time with those files if you wouldn't mind. And she said, sure. So I jumped on an airplane, flew to New York, picked up my brother. We drove upstate to this barn. Inside the barn, there was, tractors and other farm equipment. And in the corner, there was an old moldering tarp covering 8 or 9 rusting file cabinets. And we spent the whole day going through all the drawers until we found George Morton Levy's original trial file in the case of People versus Charles Lucky Luciano. And nobody'd seen it. So I had material in my hand. There have been a number of books written about Luciano, written about the trial, but nobody had the material that I had. So I read everything that had been written about the trial. I had all the books stacked up. I read magazine articles about the trial, biographies of all the participants. And what's fascinating about that trial was that the prosecutor was Thomas Dewey. Thomas Dewey became governor of New York, almost became president of the United States. Remember, Dewey defeats Truman. So that was one character about whom there had been volumes written. I read all those. I had Luciano. I had Levy, about whom there had been at least one biography written, and I had access to his family, to ask them questions, and I had his file. And then the fourth character is a prostitute and a heroin addict named Cokie Flo Brown, who is a great character. So the whole title of the book is Tom and Lucky and George and Cokie Flo. That's the whole title of the book. And I take each of them, and in alternating chapters, I write from their points of view. So, Dewey chapter, Luciano chapter, Levy chapter, Cokie Flo chapter. And to make their voices distinct, for example, I think all the Luciano chapters are written in the present tense. The rest are all in the past tense. I know all the Koki Flow chapters are written in the first person, the rest are in the third person, etc. So it was an interesting challenge writing in different, not only from different points of view, but also applying different techniques to each point of view.
Fantastic. Wow. That's
Yeah.
terrific. And Church of the Graveyard Saints, again, a completely different concept and idea.
Yeah. I moved to southwestern Colorado to McElmo Canyon in 2012 when the first of my novels, Hush Money, was just coming out. Okay. So all my novels have come out while I've been living here. And every year there'd be a new novel coming out. And of course, as you make a circle of friends, they're interested in what you're doing. And they all say, when are you going to write about here? You know?
Yeah.
So in starting in 2017 or 18, I had this idea to write a book that's set locally that involves issues locally, political issues, environmental issues involving oil and gas drilling, involving public lands, cattle grazing, those types of issues that impact people here in the American Southwest. So that book is a story of a young girl who's grown up in Cortez, Colorado, who can't wait to get away, who goes to California to go to college and never plans to come back, except that she has an affair with her professor of environmental studies, and he's hired by an environmental advocacy group to come back to the Cortez area to advocate for a ban basically on oil and gas drilling. And she comes along, and so she's returning home after 5 years to her father, from whom she's estranged, to her old boyfriend, who still carries a torch for her. And so there's a whole personal storyline going on. Plus there's the underlying environmental storyline, and that's basically what the book is about.
And lots of
it's about coming home,
yeah.
and rediscovering where you really belong.
Yeah, that's great. And I will try to remember to put the link to the previous podcast in the show notes so that folks can just jump from this one to that one and go back and learn more about Church of the Graveyard Saints. Fantastic. So what's next for Chuck Greaves and or C. Joseph Greaves?
I don't know, Mark. I'm waiting for inspiration to strike. My line when I was writing continually to get these books done under contract, I always said, I only write when I'm inspired, but I make it a point to be inspired every morning at 9 o'clock. Right. Now I'm sort of, waiting for the next great idea to hit me, to inspire me. As you know, I wrote a TV pilot. I've written some other screenplays. Yeah. I had a TV pilot produced in 2020. And I've been songwriting, and that's been kind of fun. And meanwhile, here where I live, I have a vineyard, and I'm spending every day out in the vineyard pruning my vines and whatnot. So there's plenty to keep me company.
Yeah. Do you think it'll be the C. Joseph side or the Chuck side that gets inspired next? Do you have any idea?
Well, yeah, my hope is that the Chimera Club takes off and is wildly successful, and people will be beating on my door to do Jack number 5.
That's great.
I have a few good ideas for that already.
Oh, great. Well, final question, and I gave you no advance warning of this, but we always like to wrap up with recommending one book out to the world, or a writer, somebody you just think is under the radar. Could be a big name, doesn't matter to us, just somebody you really think deserves a little pay it forward moment from you.
Well, Mark, having just read your next novel, formerly The One, now known as The Fireballer, I'll recommend that to anybody who'd care to hear about it. I think that's a great book. That's coming out when?
November, but nobody can go buy it right this moment. So I appreciate the nod. I'm gonna put you back on the hook.
Okay. Jonathan Franzen doesn't need my help to sell books, but I'm a big fan of Jonathan Franzen's, and right now I'm reading Crossroads, his big bestseller, and I'm about halfway through, and I'm just enthralled by it. He's a writer that I think really, it just has everything going for him. So I'd recommend that book highly to anybody.
Fantastic. Excellent. Chuck, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for jumping on the podcast, and we'll catch up with you down the road.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it very much.